John, your ex-wife is at reception. She says she needs to talk to you urgently about the inheritance. Lawyer Thompson's secretary stared at me as if she had just seen a ghost walk through the wall. My pen stopped in the middle of signing the last document. The ink was still wet on the paper that made my inheritance of $2,400,000, plus the Victorian mansion and my ex-mother-in-law's company shares, official. Did she specifically mention the inheritance? I asked, keeping my voice steady while my stomach plummeted. Word for word. And she seemed determined. My name is John, I'm 32 years old, and 5 minutes ago I was just a man who had lost the only person who really cared about me. Margaret, my ex-mother-in-law, had died last week, leaving me everything in her will. Now apparently, I was a man about to face the woman who abandoned me exactly 5 years ago without a word of explanation. Jessica had always been beautiful in a way that made other men turn their heads on the street. Blonde hair that looked like melted gold, blue eyes like a summer sky, and a smile that could convince anyone of anything. Especially me, who at the time was a 24-year-old accountant working 60 hours a week to pay for our small apartment. Send her in, I said to Thompson, who watched the situation with the expression of someone who had witnessed many family dramas in his 40 years as a lawyer. The door opened and she walked in as if the 5 years of silence had never existed. The same confident walk, the same elegant posture that made me forget to breathe when we were married. She wore a discreet black dress, appropriate for mourning, but one that still highlighted every curve I knew by heart. Hi, John. Her voice was exactly the same, soft and controlled. I'm sorry for your loss. I know how much Mom meant to you. Mom. She still called Margaret Mom, even after she had disappeared from her life as well. Even after sending only a condolence card to the funeral, without even showing up to say goodbye to the woman who had treated her like a daughter for 7 years. Jessica. I stood up, but didn't offer a hug or a handshake. You got here fast. The obituary was only in yesterday. A flash of something, irritation? Embarrassment, passed over his eyes before being replaced by a rehearsed expression of sadness. I keep in touch with some people in town. I heard you inherited everything. She paused for effect. It must be scary, all that responsibility all of a sudden. Thompson cleared his throat discreetly. Perhaps you'd prefer to talk in private? I can make the conference room available. That won't be necessary, I replied, turning back to Jessica. I imagine you came here for a specific reason. She moved closer, and I could smell the perfume she used to wear, that expensive French one she insisted I buy even when we could barely afford the rent. Apparently, someone else had taken on that responsibility in recent years. John, I know our breakup wasn't ideal. I was going through a really tough time back then, and I made some decisions I deeply regret. Her words came out perfectly articulated, as if she had rehearsed them in front of a mirror. But we're still technically married. We never finalized the divorce. There it was. The real reason for the lightning visit, the mourning clothes, the carefully chosen words about regret and difficult times. What she didn't know was that Margaret had predicted this exact situation. In fact, my dear ex-mother-in-law had spent the last 2 years meticulously preparing a defense against exactly this kind of opportunistic attempt. If you're enjoying discovering how this story of betrayal and greed will unfold, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any details of the revenge Margaret planned from beyond the grave. As Jessica continued her speech about second chances and shared responsibilities, I just smiled silently. She had no idea what she was about to discover about her attempt to claim an inheritance that could never be hers. John, I know this is sudden, but we need to talk about our future. About what Margaret would have wanted for us. Jessica settled into the chair across from Thompson's desk as if it were her own living room, crossing her legs with that calculated elegance I knew all too well. Future. Wow. Her audacity was impressive, considering that our last encounter had been in the kitchen of our old apartment, when she had packed 2 suitcases and said she was going away to clear her head for a few days. That was 5 years, 2 weeks, and 3 days ago. Not that I was counting. What kind of future, Jessica? I asked, keeping my voice neutral as I watched Thompson discreetly organize some papers. He seemed to be preparing for something. Well, we're husband and wife. Legally speaking. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture that used to disarm me completely when we were young and in love. And considering the size of this inheritance, I think Margaret would have been happy knowing that we're back together to manage it responsibly. Margaret. She was talking about the woman she had treated like trash during our marriage, the woman whose funeral she had completely ignored, the woman she had cut out of her life the same day she abandoned me. Jessica always had a knack for rewriting history to suit her, but this revised version of reality was beyond even her usual standards. Interesting perspective, I said. Especially considering you haven't spoken to Margaret once in the last 5 years. A flash of irritation crossed her perfect face before being replaced by a forced sad expression. I was dealing with serious personal issues, John. Depression, anxiety. You know how I get when I'm emotionally overwhelmed. Emotionally overwhelmed. That was how she described her pattern of running away whenever life got challenging. Like when my father died in the 2nd year of our marriage and she disappeared for 3 days to process the situation, returning with shopping bags and an excuse about needing therapeutic space. Or when Margaret was diagnosed with arthritis and needed surgery, and Jessica suddenly developed a mysterious allergy to hospitals. And during those 5 years of processing, I continued, you never thought to call? Send a birthday card? An email asking if I was alive? Thompson cleared his throat softly. Perhaps it's appropriate to mention that I have relevant documentation of attempts to contact you over the past several years. Jessica paled slightly but recovered quickly. Of course, I tried to get in touch a few times. But you had changed your phone number, and Margaret, well, she was never exactly welcoming of my presence. That was an interesting version of events. The truth was that Margaret had shown me exactly 7 attempts at contact from Jessica over the years. 2 drunken voicemails on my 30th birthday, a text message 3 years ago asking if I still had that savings account, a call to Margaret asking about the family's financial status, 2 attempts to add me on social media during periods that I later discovered coincided with her job changes, and finally, a condolence card that arrived after Margaret's funeral with a handwritten note saying, "I'm sorry for your loss. I hope we can talk soon." All carefully filed away by Margaret, along with other information Jessica had no idea existed. John, Jessica leaned forward, placing her hand on the arm of my chair, I know I hurt you. I was selfish and immature. But these years have taught me a lot about myself. About what really matters. And what really matters? I asked, genuinely curious to hear how she would justify her sudden presence. Family. Commitment. Building something lasting together. Her words came out with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in front of the mirror. I was talking to my therapist about it. About how I was a coward for not fighting for our marriage back then. How I let my own fears sabotage the best thing I ever had. Therapist. Interesting how she always had a mental health professional conveniently available to validate her questionable decisions. During our marriage, it had been the career counselor who encouraged her to leave 3 different jobs because her bosses didn't recognize her potential. Before that, it was the life coach who convinced her that she deserved more financial abundance and should consider opportunities that paid better, even if it meant working for competitors of companies where I had established professional relationships. And your therapist specifically recommended that you show up on the day of the will reading to discuss our meeting? I asked. John, I didn't know about the will. I heard about Margaret's death in the papers and came to offer support during this difficult time. Her voice took on that slightly hurt tone she used when she felt cornered. If you want the truth, I've been planning to contact you for months. Her death just sped up my schedule. Thompson looked over his glasses. Mrs. Patterson, it might be appropriate to clarify your current marital status. For legal purposes, of course. Patterson. She had changed her name. Jessica had always been pragmatic about these things, so it made sense that she had taken the last name of a boyfriend or husband in recent years. The question was how many she had had and what her current situation was. It's complicated, she replied, avoiding my gaze. I've been in a few relationships, but nothing official. I never legally divorced John because part of me always hoped we'd find our way back to each other. My laughter escaped before I could contain it. Jessica, you emptied our joint account before you left. You took the jewelry Margaret had given you. You canceled my credit card. And you left a note saying I was too emotionally limited for a mature relationship. Exactly what part of that suggested you were holding out hope for reconciliation. His face flushed, but he kept his composure. I was hurt and confused. I said things I deeply regret. But people's actions when they're hurting don't always reflect their true feelings. True feelings, I repeated slowly. And when exactly did you discover these true feelings? Before or after you read about the inheritance in the paper? For a moment, the mask slipped completely. I saw a glimpse of the Jessica I knew intimately, calculating, frustrated at being caught in an obvious lie, quickly recalibrating her approach. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, the vulnerable expression returned. John, I understand your skepticism. I really do. But I'm here because I want to do the right thing. For us, for Margaret's memory, for everything we built together before I screwed it all up. Thompson closed one folder and opened another. Perhaps this is an appropriate time to mention that Mrs. Hughes left specific instructions regarding this situation. Jessica and I turned to him simultaneously. She with cautious curiosity, I with the first genuine smile I'd felt since she'd entered the room. Margaret had always been 3 steps ahead of all of us. And apparently, even from the grave, she was still playing chess while Jessica thought she was playing checkers. Specific instructions about me? Jessica asked, her voice rising an octave. The veneer of control was beginning to crack. What kind of instructions? Thompson opened the folder with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. Margaret documented her interactions with you extensively over the years, Jessica. Particularly your attempts to, how can I put this diplomatically, monetize your family connection. Jessica's face paled visibly. I don't know what you're talking about. No. Thompson removed an audio recording. Perhaps this will refresh your memory. This is from 2 years ago, when you called Margaret claiming you needed $15,000 for emergency surgery that, our subsequent investigation revealed, never happened. My ex-wife sat up straight in her chair as if she had been electrocuted. You investigated me? Margaret investigated a lot of things, I replied calmly, beginning to understand the extent of what my ex-mother-in-law had prepared. She was always meticulous. Jessica's mask of vulnerability crumbled completely, replaced by an expression I knew all too well, the face she wore when she felt cornered and was calculating her next lie. John, you can't believe these ridiculous accusations. Margaret never forgave me for marrying you. She's always been jealous of our happiness. Our happiness. As if the last 2 years of our marriage, when she spent money we didn't have on designer clothes and expensive dinners while I worked double shifts to pay off our debts, had been some kind of romantic fairy tale. Margaret was jealous, I repeated slowly, of the woman who emptied our savings account to buy a Louis Vuitton handbag and then told me I was too cheap to understand that investing in your appearance is investing in your future. Thompson cleared his throat. Actually, we have some interesting documentation on those purchases, particularly on how they were financed. Jessica stiffened. What does that mean? It means, Thompson continued relentlessly, that Margaret hired a private investigator not only to track you down after you left, but to monitor your financial activities. We've discovered some interesting patterns. He removed another folder. For example, 3 weeks before you left John, you opened a secret checking account. A week before your departure, you cashed a certificate of deposit that John didn't know existed, using forged forms of his signature. My blood ran cold. What certificate of deposit? The one you set up using the $20,000 Margaret gave you as a wedding gift, Thompson explained. Jessica converted the money into her own name and moved it into the secret account. Technically, that constitutes marital theft. The room fell deathly silent. Jessica opened and closed her mouth several times like a fish out of water. That's impossible. You can't prove that. Actually, we can. Thompson slid copies of bank documents across the table. Margaret kept every paper trail. Every transaction, every forgery, every lie. I studied the documents with growing disbelief. During our marriage, whenever I questioned our excessive spending or the lack of money in our savings account, Jessica made me feel like I was being paranoid or controlling. Now I was discovering that she had systematically stolen from me for months before she left. Why didn't Margaret ever tell me about this? I asked. Because she wanted you to heal from the divorce naturally, without carrying additional resentment, Thompson replied. But she also wanted to ensure that if Jessica ever tried to claim part of her new life or inheritance, you would have all the evidence you needed to protect yourself. Jessica stood up abruptly, her face red with anger and shame. You two plotted against me. Margaret always hated me because I was young and beautiful, and John loved me more than he loved her. The laugh that came out of my throat was bitter. Jessica, you left me a note saying I was emotionally incapable of an adult relationship. You emptied our joint account. You stole the money from our wedding gift. And now you show up 5 years later, claiming you love me. I was confused. I was young. You were 25 when you left me, I replied. Old enough to be held responsible for your choices. Thompson leaned forward. Jessica, it might be appropriate to mention that we tried to contact you several times over the years to resolve these financial issues discreetly. You never responded. Because I never received any communication. Interesting, Thompson said, removing another file. Because we have delivery confirmation for 5 different addresses where you resided, including confirmed signatures. He spread the delivery receipts across the table. Each one clearly showed Jessica's signature. You received these notifications and chose to ignore them. Now, conveniently, you show up on the very day John inherits a substantial fortune. Jessica stared at the documents as if they were poisonous snakes. I don't remember receiving these. Selective amnesia is an interesting condition, I observed dryly. Especially when it only applies to legal responsibilities. She turned to me with tears in her eyes, tears that once would have made me rush to comfort her. John, please. I know I've made mistakes. But we're a family. We promised in church that it would be for better or worse, in wealth and in poverty. Until death do us part, I added. But you abandoned me long before death, Jessica. You chose the worse, and ran away when things got tough. Thompson closed one folder and opened another, even larger one. Perhaps this is the appropriate time to discuss your more recent activities, Jessica. Particularly your other marital relationships. The blood drained completely from her face. My what? Margaret has continued to monitor you sporadically. We discovered that you married Robert Patterson in Nevada 3 years ago, without ever legally divorcing John. A bombshell exploded in the silence of the room. Jessica had committed bigamy. Technically, Thompson continued calmly, that makes your second marriage null and void. But it also makes you criminally liable for bigamy, which is a federal crime. Jessica sank into her chair, all bravado gone. I thought. You thought you'd never get caught, I finished for her. Just like you thought you'd never be held accountable for the money you stole. Just like you thought you could show up here and claim half of an inheritance that Margaret specifically wanted to go to me. My voice was steady now, the initial anger replaced by cold clarity. This woman had systematically lied, cheated, and stolen. And now she was trying to do it again. Margaret protected me once again, I murmured, more to myself than to the others. Even after she died. Thompson nodded. She anticipated this situation exactly. In fact, there's more. Jessica looked at him with growing terror. More what? More evidence. More documentation. And more legal consequences if you continue to pursue this fraudulent claim. I stood up slowly, finally understanding the magnitude of what Margaret had done. She hadn't just left me an inheritance. She had given me the tools to defend myself against the woman who had almost destroyed my life once. Jessica, I said calmly, I think you should leave now. Before this gets even worse for you. But then she did something that caught me completely off guard. Instead of leaving defeated, her eyes narrowed and I saw a flash of the Jessica I had forgotten existed, the calculating, manipulative woman who always had a plan B. Very well, she said, her voice suddenly too calm. If that's how you want to play it. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and picked up her purse with deliberate movements. John, you can have this evidence now. But I know your secrets too. And some of them, well, some of them Margaret never knew. My stomach clenched. What secrets? What was she talking about? Thompson frowned. Mrs. Patterson, any attempt at blackmail or extortion would be extremely ill-advised. Jessica smiled for the first time since she had entered the room, a smile that didn't reach her eyes and made every fiber of my being shiver. It's not blackmail, Mr. Thompson. It's just clarification. About the real reasons Margaret hated me so much. About why she really wanted me away from John. She headed for the door, paused, and turned to face me directly. Ask him about Chicago, Mr. Thompson. About what happened at the accounting convention 3 years ago. Margaret found out, and that's why she changed her will. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone with Thompson and a growing sense that the battle was just beginning. Chicago. Thompson repeated, removing his glasses to clean them, a gesture I recognized as his method of buying time to process information. John, is there something about Chicago I should know? My mind raced back to 3 years ago. The annual accounting convention at the Palmer Hotel. 3 days of seminars on tax reform and networking with colleagues in the profession. 3 days that changed my perspective on many things, including my marriage to Jessica. That's not what she's implying, I replied calmly, but I felt my stomach tighten. In Chicago, I discovered some truths about our marriage that I've never told anyone. Not even Margaret. Thompson nodded slowly. And Jessica knows these truths? She knows some of them, but not the part that really matters. It was complicated to explain Chicago without sounding like a man trying to justify betrayal. Because, technically, there was betrayal involved. Just not in the way Jessica was trying to imply. Thompson, I need to tell you about Chicago so you understand what Jessica might try to do with this information. He settled back in his chair, bracing himself for a long story. On the second night of the convention, I got a call from Jessica. She was in tears, saying that our house had been broken into, that they were threatening to hurt her, that I needed to transfer money immediately to an account she would open for our safety. Thompson raised an eyebrow. A convenient break-in during his trip. Exactly. But at the time, I believed her. I canceled my activities and was about to fly back when I met Amanda Richardson in the hotel lobby. She was a lawyer specializing in marital fraud, and she was at the same convention. We started talking casually about the stress of business travel. I paused, remembering the conversation that changed everything. When I mentioned the break-in and the request to transfer money, Amanda immediately warned me about marital scams. She convinced me to call the local police before making any transfers. And you found out there was no record of a break-in. Worse than that. I found out Jessica was in Las Vegas with a man named Robert Patterson. The same Robert she later married. The photos Amanda helped me obtain showed Jessica laughing in a casino while she was supposedly being threatened at home. Thompson jotted down a few notes. And this Amanda can testify to that discovery? She can. But here's the problem. Jessica knows that Amanda and I were close during those 3 days. Very close. She can twist that to make it look like I had an extramarital affair. Did you? Thompson's direct question deserved a direct answer. Not physically, but emotionally, yes. Amanda showed me what a marriage should be like. Real conversation, mutual support, honesty. 3 days with her showed me that 5 years with Jessica had been a performance based on lies. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. Jessica could use that to question your moral credibility. Claim that you're a hypocritical adulterer who's slandering an innocent wife. Exactly. And if she can plant that narrative, her inheritance could be called into question in court. Especially if she claims that Margaret changed her will based on false information about Jessica's character versus yours. I felt the weight of Jessica's strategy. She had always been better at manipulating narratives than facing facts. But, Thompson continued, there's something Jessica doesn't know about the extent of Margaret's documentation. He opened a locked drawer in his desk and removed a sealed envelope with my name on it. Margaret asked me to open this only if Jessica mentioned Chicago specifically. I broke the seal with slightly trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten letter and a flash drive. My dear John, I read aloud, if you are reading this, it means Jessica has tried to use Chicago against you. I want you to know that Amanda Richardson contacted me 2 years ago. My blood ran cold. Margaret knew Amanda? She came to me because she was concerned about your financial and emotional security. Amanda told me about the scam Jessica tried to pull during the convention, how you almost fell for it, and about her activities in Las Vegas. Thompson watched my expression closely as I continued reading. Amanda also told me about the feelings you developed for each other, and how you chose to honor your marriage vows despite discovering Jessica's true nature. That showed me your true character, John. A man of lesser integrity would have used the discovery of the scam as an excuse to justify infidelity. My voice faltered slightly. Margaret had known about Amanda all this time. On the flash drive are recordings of all the calls Jessica made to different men during her business trip to Chicago, including conversations where she laughs about how pathetically trusting you are and how she plans to bleed your account dry before leaving for good. Thompson plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The first audio file showed Jessica talking to Robert Patterson on the exact night she was supposedly being threatened. "Baby, he's so stupid," Jessica's voice came out of the speakers. "He believes everything I say. A few more months of draining his accounts, and we can move to Miami like we planned." The second recording was even worse. "I promise that as soon as I get as much as I can transferred to our secret account, I'll end this sham marriage. John is useful financially, but he's so limited. You give me the excitement he never could." Thompson paused the audio. Margaret intercepted these calls legally through a licensed investigator. Jessica was using phones registered under both of your names, so technically Margaret had legal authority to monitor suspicious activity. Why didn't Margaret ever show me this before? Because she wanted you to heal naturally from the divorce. But she also wanted to ensure that if Jessica ever tried to destroy your reputation or claim your assets, you would have irrefutable evidence of who had truly been unfaithful, financially and emotionally. I continued reading Margaret's letter. "Amanda Richardson is now well established in Chicago and has agreed to testify about the events if necessary. She has also developed genuine feelings for you, John, and is willing to support you through this ordeal." My heart raced. Amanda still thought about me after 3 years? If Jessica tries to use Chicago against you, remember, you were the victim of an attempted fraud, not the perpetrator of infidelity. Your integrity remained intact even when you discovered your wife's betrayal. Thompson closed the laptop. "John, with these recordings and Amanda's testimony, any attempt by Jessica to question your morality will backfire dramatically. But she can still try to plant doubts. Create public drama. She can. And that's exactly why Margaret has prepared Phase 2 of your protection." He removed another file. "Margaret has established contact with Jessica's current husband, Robert Patterson. Apparently, he doesn't know about the bigamy. In fact, he believes she's been divorced for years." I sat up straighter in my chair. Margaret contacted Robert. More than that. She has complete documentation of Jessica's financial activities with Robert. It turns out she pulled the same scam on him she tried to pull on you. Secret accounts, unauthorized transfers, elaborate stories about financial emergencies. A plan began to form in my mind. Jessica had underestimated Margaret again. "Thompson, are you telling me we have evidence not only of Jessica's crimes against me, but also against her current husband?" "That's correct. And Robert Patterson is very interested in talking to you about shared experiences." I grabbed my phone and started crunching numbers. Jessica thought she had a trump card with Chicago. But Margaret had turned that card into a trap. If you're following this story of betrayal and calculated revenge, subscribe to the channel, because what's coming will show you how meticulous planning can turn a threat into self-destruction. "Thompson, I need to talk to Amanda and Robert. Jessica wants to play with Chicago? Then let's give her the full confrontation she didn't expect." As we dialed the numbers, I felt a complete shift in my perspective. I was no longer on the defensive, reacting to Jessica's threats. I was about to implement the most comprehensive strategy Margaret had left me. Jessica had made a fatal mistake in mentioning Chicago. Now she was about to discover that some trump cards only work when the game isn't rigged against you from the start. 3 hours later, my phone rang with a call from Chicago. Amanda Richardson. Her voice still carried that confident, direct tone that had impressed me years ago. "John, I got Mr. Thompson's message. I'm flying out there tomorrow. And you'll be happy to know that Robert Patterson is on the same flight." Robert had reacted to the evidence of bigamy and marital fraud exactly as Thompson had predicted. After discovering that Jessica had pulled the same scam on him that she had tried on me, he was more than willing to cooperate in exposing her legally. "How long have you known about Jessica?" I asked Amanda. "Margaret contacted me 2 years ago. She was worried that Jessica might try something when she died. She asked for my help in documenting everything about Chicago from our perspective." 2 hours later, as I was organizing the final files with Thompson, my phone rang again. "Jessica. John, we need to talk. Now. I'm busy." I have information about Amanda that may interest you. About why she was really in Chicago. She was still trying to manipulate the situation, but now I heard her words with complete clarity. Every attempt at blackmail only confirmed the pattern Margaret had meticulously documented. Jessica, if you have something to say, you can say it in front of my lawyer. I'd prefer to talk in private. Let's say, your favorite restaurant. The one we used to go to. The Riverside Cafe. Of course she would choose a place laden with emotional memories. It was always her strategy when she felt cornered, appeal to nostalgia and sentimental manipulation. 1 hour. But Thompson is coming with me. Then bring him. But when you hear what I have to say about your dear Amanda, you'll want privacy. When we arrived at the cafe, Jessica was already there, sitting at our old favorite table by the window. She had changed out of her morning dress into something more casual, but still calculatedly attractive. John, she stood up when she saw me, completely ignoring Thompson. Thanks for coming. 5 minutes, Jessica. Say what you have to say. She sat down, crossing her legs with that studied elegance. Amanda Richardson isn't who you think she is. And who is she? A private investigator hired by Margaret to spy on me during our convention. My blood ran cold for a moment. Thompson glanced at me quickly but kept his expression neutral. Go on, he said calmly. Margaret paid Amanda to get close to you in Chicago. To confirm her suspicions about me and to seduce you emotionally. She paused dramatically, watching my reaction. All that connection you felt? It was a professional performance, John. Amanda was paid to make you fall in love with her while she gathered evidence against me. For a moment, I felt the floor disappear beneath my feet. If this was true, do you have proof of this? Thompson asked coldly. Jessica smiled triumphantly. I have Margaret's payment records to Amanda. $50,000 transferred before the convention, another $50,000 after. She slid a folder across the table. Bank statements, emails, even phone recordings where Margaret and Amanda discuss how to take me down. I studied the documents with growing horror. They looked authentic. Dates, amounts, even transcripts of conversations that sounded exactly like something Margaret would say. You see, John. Jessica leaned forward, her voice taking on that gentle hurt tone he knew all too well. Margaret manipulated us both. She destroyed our marriage to satisfy her personal vendetta against me. Thompson examined the documents silently. Jessica continued. Amanda never felt anything real for you. She was working. And now she's coming back to finish the job, to make sure I don't get any of the inheritance Margaret used as bait for her final trap. My mind raced. If Amanda had been paid by Margaret, then everything I felt in Chicago had been an illusion? Our emotional connection, the deep conversations, the feeling of finally finding someone who understood me? John, Jessica placed her hand over mine. I know this is painful. But Margaret used us as pawns in her personal chess game. She destroyed our family to satisfy her irrational hatred of me. For the first time in days, real doubts began to form in my mind. What if Jessica was right? What if Margaret had orchestrated everything, including my emotional connection to Amanda? Thompson cleared his throat. Jessica, these documents are interesting. But you've made a fundamental mistake. What mistake? You assumed we wouldn't verify their authenticity before reacting emotionally. He removed his tablet and showed us a screen. These bank statements are forgeries. The dates don't match the correct weekends. The bank routing numbers don't exist. And more importantly, he rotated the screen so we could see it clearly. Amanda Richardson never received payments from Margaret. She received payments from a security firm hired by Margaret to investigate you, Jessica. To document your fraudulent activities. Jessica's face paled. Amanda was hired not to seduce John, but to protect him. Margaret discovered your plans to drain his accounts during the convention and hired Amanda to intercept your attempt at fraud. Thompson continued relentlessly. In fact, Amanda saved John from losing not only the $20,000 you were trying to steal, but also the $60,000 in certificates you had planned to liquidate illegally. Jessica stood up abruptly. That's a lie. It's the truth. And Robert Patterson confirmed identical patterns in your relationship. Amanda helped him recover $40,000 that you had illegally transferred from his accounts. As the truth unfolded, I realized that Jessica had attempted one last desperate move. She had created false documents to destroy my trust in Amanda and Thompson, hoping that I would doubt everyone around me. "Jessica," I said calmly, "you've always been good at lying. But this time, Margaret was 3 steps ahead of you." She looked at me with pure hatred. "You deserve to be alone, John. You and your precious Margaret deserve each other." "Actually," Thompson smiled for the first time all day, "there's one more thing you should know, Jessica." He opened one last folder. "Margaret didn't just document your financial crimes. She also documented a little detail about your relationship with Robert Patterson." Jessica stopped in mid-motion of picking up her purse. "Robert isn't just a victim of bigamy. He's also a federal investigator specializing in marital fraud. He's been working on a case against you for 6 months." The silence in the cafe was deafening. "In fact," Thompson glanced toward the door, "he should be here any minute." That's when I saw a tall man approaching our table, Amanda at his side. She looked exactly as I remembered her, confident, intelligent, genuine. Jessica looked around like a cornered animal, finally realizing she'd fallen into a trap Margaret had been setting for years. "John," Amanda said softly, extending her hand, "it's good to see you again. I'm sorry about the circumstances." When our eyes met, I saw only sincerity. Margaret hadn't fabricated our connection. She had simply ensured that Jessica could never use our honesty against us. "Jessica Patterson," Robert showed her his federal ID, "you are under arrest for bigamy, marital fraud, document forgery, and multiple violations of federal financial fraud laws." As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Jessica looked at me one last time. "You may have won today, John. But you'll spend the rest of your life alone, just like Margaret." I smiled for the first time in days. "Actually, Jessica, I think Margaret left me much more than just money." As she was led away, I realized that Margaret's greatest legacy had not been her fortune, but the lesson that some people deserve second chances, while others deserve exactly what they get through their own choices. 6 months later, Jessica was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison on multiple counts of marital fraud and bigamy. Robert Patterson testified about identical patterns of financial manipulation, providing evidence that completely corroborated Margaret's case against her. During the trial, we discovered that Jessica had pulled variations of the same scam on at least 4 different men over the years. The judge called her actions systematic predation when handing down the sentence. I watched the verdict alongside Amanda, who had stayed in town throughout the legal process. Our reconnection was gradual but natural, long conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning, walks through the parks Margaret used to frequent, quiet moments where we simply enjoyed each other's company. "Margaret knew," Amanda told me one night as we sorted through the last of the estate documents. "She called me 2 years ago and said she had a feeling Jessica would try something when she died. She asked for my help not only to protect you financially, but to make sure you weren't left alone to deal with this." Margaret's house became ours. We kept its classic elegance but added touches that reflected our shared life. The office where she meticulously planned my protection now houses my new accounting practice specializing in marital fraud cases. The foundation I established in Margaret's memory has already helped dozens of people recover from scams similar to the one Jessica pulled. We use part of the inheritance to fund free investigations and legal support for victims of marital fraud. Thompson has become much more than a lawyer. He's the grandfather Amanda and I never had. He has dinner with us every Friday, always with new stories about how Margaret saw every move coming 3 years in advance. "She didn't just leave me money," I often reflect. "Margaret taught me that true family isn't defined by blood or legal contracts, but by who chooses to stay when life gets tough." Jessica was wrong about me ending up alone like Margaret. Margaret was never alone. She had people who loved her exactly as she was. People who valued her loyalty, her intelligence, her ability to protect those she loved. Last week, Amanda and I visited Margaret's grave for the first time together. We left fresh flowers and told her about our plans to get married next fall. "Thank you for protecting me one last time," I whispered to the black granite headstone. "And thank you for making sure I learned the difference between people who love me and people who love what I have." If this story of manipulation, protection, and true love touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories about how justice can prevail even in the darkest moments of life. Today, when I look at Amanda reading on Margaret's couch, wearing the glasses she left here 3 years ago, I know that some inheritances can't be measured in dollars. The most valuable ones are passed down through examples of character, lessons about integrity, and the courage to protect those who really matter. Jessica accomplished one thing. She taught me that Margaret was right about almost everything, including who deserved my trust.